Yes, I'm Michelle Diamond. I'm a CEO of Elevate Diamond Strategies. So it's a growth strategy development and execution firm. So we focus a lot on new market entry, go to market, M&A sometimes, and helping companies actually execute. Also, I just finished writing my first book, which is a 10-step guide to creating your own growth strategy for your company. And that's a lot for smaller businesses, startup founders, people who may be cash strapped and can't afford, let's just say full-blown consulting right now, to help teach them what growth strategy is and how they can use it for their organizations. So when developing a growth strategy, a lot goes into it. And even though I'm charged and my firm is charged with the analytical side, which is you still have to get done, the research side and all of that. The majority really is working together with the team. So, there's a lot of stressors and things and a lot of emotional balance that goes into play. So been fortunate enough to work with companies from startup, early growth stage, small to mid cap, all the way up to Fortune 50. And what you find is that, people don't think about the extras. So when you're founding your startup, obviously that's your baby. That's a company you're starting. Even early growth stage, you can, if whether you're raising money or not, you're getting into different rounds. There's a lot that goes into that mentally that takes, it's a lot emotionally that takes, it's a lot in terms of your vision, your goals, and clarifying that sometimes. And being flexible, but then as you bring on employees, then you have to answer to investors and things of that nature. And even if you're a family office or you're coming from that perspective, you still have your generational wealth to protect. You have other aspects, or an executive at a large company, you have a board and all these other variances. And even as the investors, sometimes I've retained by private equity firms or VCs, and they have stress too, because they're investing. They want to make sure that they're doing something that's a winner. And part of that, again, is balancing the logical aspect of it. Like, okay, how do we look at this company logically? Whether they're patient and can wait for you to, get profitable, or they want you to be profitable right away. I mean, typically that's more private equity VCs start off on the other end. They're looking to see, like, okay, is this company going to be a fit? Can we add value to this company, because they want to return the investment, and they have people to answer to as well. So I think in the whole ecosystem, like, everyone has to understand sometimes that the majority of what you're doing to make sure that it's effective and it is executable. Like, I always do the development and the execution piece. And the execution piece really has to do a lot with understanding the culture, the personality, and the makeup of the organization, but then all of the stakeholders involved and at each different stage. Because as you're growing, you could be losing money or stagnant. That's a lot of stress, obviously. No one likes to lose money. You got to figure that out. You got to turn around. You could be incremental and bootstrapping. That's a lot. But when you really say, don't want to do that anymore, we want to, like, accelerate growth, that's a big deal. If you're already growing really rapidly, you need help scaling properly so you don't blow up one day and everything's gone, because unfortunately it's happened. That's a lot of stress as well too. So it's really being able to kind of look at things from different perspective, uniquely tailored to the people, but putting in that other aspect too, because you have to make sure that the road that you take and the strategy that's decided is something that's going to have is increase the probability of being effective in order to do that. So all of those things really go into play, even though oftentimes I think as advisors and consultants and interim executive, all these other different things, you focus more on, okay, what are you going to deliver, the analytical, logical side, which is very important too. But 50% or more oftentimes is really just making sure that those other mental and emotional aspects are embedded as well. And that's honestly what is the difference between a lot of times, like, I have a quote, strategies don't belong on a shelf. That's really the difference a lot of times. Like, okay, I'm just going to do this analysis and this makes sense. But then you don't really incorporate all the other parts of what's really going to make something happen for any company of any size in any growth situation. And really putting those two together is what makes it effective, and then gives people more stake in the game, and then they can be proud of something that they're a part of. Comes first at the beginning. Once a growth strategy is developed, so a lot of times, even when I'm working with companies, like, and I've been fortunate, I've worked with like 65 companies in 31 different industries. So people, like, it's all over the place, right? But at the same time, it's not, which is great. Which is because I look for commonalities and best practices across that can be applied at every stage in every industry. And so when I'm working with the companies, the first thing is, when I'm working to develop the strategy with the leader, the founder, and whoever else may be on board the first. It's a very open, kind of communicative type of thing. It's not like I go off somewhere and then come back and say, here, it's more like, okay, this is what I'm thinking. This is where I'm seeing. Let's make it a little bit more collaborative. And as companies get bigger, that might be the leadership team, the executive team, the board, whoever it is that's a part of it. But even if you're starting off, the principles and the approach is the same. So it's not something that's a big aha. And then as soon as the strategy is developed, and again, your team, yourself, when it's time for all the employees, I'm very, very big on you have to let everybody know what's going on. Unless it's something that's confidential. Obviously, if it's confidential and it's some kind of acquisition or something you can't speak on, that's different. But for the most part, the biggest thing is communication. Employees want to know from the, one entry level all the way up. They want to know what's going on. They want to know how what they do contributes to the company and what they're a part of on a bigger, from a bigger scale. Now, social is very important now, of course, and culture and what we're doing for the environment and all that. But even just from a growth strategy perspective, before ESG was the big mainstay or the focal point that everyone's making it now, or at least in the past decade or so, it's like, you want to know when you go to work, okay, you want to feel good, like, okay, if the company's increasing their revenue, how am I contributing to them increasing their revenue? Sometimes it happens when you do your one-on-ones and things like that. But oftentimes, especially when you're first starting out building an organization, you're founder, you're still building your organization, you're still building your infrastructure, you're still figuring all of these things out. And sometimes communication can fall by the wayside. So to the extent that you let them know that they have skin in the game, it is so important to make them feel that way. And then once they do, the second most important thing is, and this is so simple, but you'd be so surprised, no matter what size the company is, what people don't do, an organization don't do, follow up on the feedback. Like it's not rocket science, but it is hardly ever done. And I can tell you, like I said, I work with all companies, all sizes. It could be Fortune 50, or it could be a startup. It doesn't really matter. You have to follow up. So all these things you're talking about, which I think is great, the type of tools you have and what you're doing to assess the feedback and the emotions in employees, those are so super important. What's even more important is once you get that information, you do something with it, right? So if you have collective feedback, on the verbal side and employees are saying certain things, you want to address it because guess what? The more you address the feedback, and for customers too, because a lot of companies don't do it with customers either, all of your stakeholders, the minute you ask for their feedback, let them know they're heard by saying, oh, yes, we received your feedback and we've done A, B, C, or D, or we can't do A, B yet, but we will think about doing it. Just really communicate it out, and the emotional part as well. Someone can say, oh my gosh, I'm stressed out, I'm overwhelmed. If you just say, okay, great, we know this employee is stressed out and overwhelmed, they may quit. Like you don't want to be in fire mode all the time. You want to say, well, what can we do to address this issue? And is it an individual issue or is it a collective one? Because again, developing and then executing a strategy, making sure your organization continues to grow, incorporates all these things. You can't do it without your employees, you can't do it without your stakeholders, but you also can't do it if you just have this information and you don't do anything with the information. You have to make information actionable, and then you have to circle back. And then what you'll find, you'll have more loyal employees, you'll have better, more healthier stakeholders, you'll have everything all around because everyone knows where you're at. And the more honest you are with it, because sometimes you can't do everything, but just let people know they're heard and this is what we're doing. But then to the extent that you can do something about it and they see that, then that's something that's going to give them even more skin in the game emotionally and mentally. And that's going to add to your top and bottom line. Growth strategy is about what to do as well as what not to do. Like it's complex, but it's as simple as that at the end of the day. And part of that is knowing how to prioritize. Like you always, any company, anywhere has a world of opportunities, right? You can go a lot of different ways, in terms of, okay, this is potential options here, this market here, this customer base here, this organization here, like this product, this service, like you have so many different choices. But the biggest thing is about structuring all of that to say, okay, this is the world of opportunities based on our analysis, based on where the gaps are, based on where we think we can add the most value. Here is where we're going to go. Right? That's what the whole thing is about. When I do that with companies, what I broke down in my book in the 10 steps, that's what will help. I found an entrepreneur do it too. I go through all that in terms of like, okay, these are the 10 steps that you have to create your own growth strategy for your company. This is what you follow. This is how you get to that place. It's not just, oh, we have a great idea, let's just run and do that. It's like, let's funnel it through our criteria and prioritize. So when you get to that place where this is the initiative, or if these are the 3 initiatives or whatever it is, because depending on the organization size, there's only so much you can handle. then it's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And that's part of the communicating and getting back to create the strategic plan. Then you have to make sure that that's being followed. You have to have ownership. You have to have touch points. You have to have progress, but you have to constantly make sure that since this is what we're going after, everyone's on the same page. We have a way to do that, verbally, but we also have a way to do that concrete process wise, to be able to have these checkpoints and make sure that we're on track so that we can be productive. Because then you're right, everyone will be all over the place. And a lot of times companies will be all over the place, honestly, because they don't communicate. I want to say this really quick because I know I want you to speak to but one time I had a company and I was brought in when they got a new president. This was a business unit of a very large company, a small business unit though, like $35 million business unit after they acquired a company. And he brought me in to go and review their strategy, make sure it made sense. I went through all of this stuff, all the great consulting analysis stuff. And at the end of the day, I brought in his team, the acquired company's team. If they realized when I just talked to everybody that they had 40 initiatives going on with this little company, and they had no idea because they never talked to each other. And with everything else that I did, all the research analysis, that was what they were like so excited about. Oh my gosh, we have 40 things going on. And I got them to whittle it down to 8 through like a facilitation session with the senior management team by just, again, like you said, prioritizing, focusing, being productive. Where are we going with this combined company now after this acquisition? What are our goals? Let's make sure that whatever everyone's working on is in alignment with these goals. And then from there, we can parse off who's responsible for what. And it was like revolutionary for them. It was a list. I mean, seriously, that big. But that's how you do it. But again, even though that company wasn't, I mean, that business unit wasn't very big, it can happen anywhere. And I think that's how you do the most productive. And then in terms of wellness, again, like we mentioned earlier, and I think everyone said on this panel earlier, is really about making sure people feel important, they feel valued. You know where people are mentally and emotionally, as well as productivity wise. And their productivity is obviously measured by their output in terms of how they are lining up with their goals. But the biggest thing is that they have to know what to do. If an employee or executive or otherwise doesn't know what the heck they're doing, or they'll do whatever they think is best. And that's nothing wrong with that. But then that's how you get 40 initiatives. We're a very small company and everyone's just doing all these different things, some of which aligned with growth, some of which didn't. But then fortunately, once they got back on track, then they were able to achieve and exceed their goals. So that's the type of thing that can be done at any size and any stage. But really making sure that you have those two things in place is really important. Firm and Elevate Diamond Strategy, we do the same thing. We use evaluative criteria. So come up with like a really big list of evaluative criteria. And even part of that workshop that I mentioned before with that senior management team that I do with all the companies too, is you say, all right, of these criteria, which are the most important? And it's almost like every opportunity or initiative will funnel through that criteria, and then you assign weights to them and you rank and prioritize them. So it definitely is rooted in data as well. But in terms of, you can, and then what comes up in terms of the highest number based on what we're saying is the most important criteria, that's really how you prioritize the initiatives from there. And then you figure out how many you can handle. Like most organizations can only handle really 2 to 3, like major ones per year. Some bigger obviously can handle more, but and some maybe even 1. But that's how they're able to go and go ahead and prioritize that out, and how we're able to kind of whittle that down using that criteria and using the actual numbers and logic and the data assigned to it, and where people couldn't really fight over that because they all agreed on the criteria and agreed on the weight. So once you agree on the criteria, you agree on the weight, have more of an acceptance of it. So yeah, we do similar things. That I think you have a different stint because different purview because of what you do in Tina, but I definitely get it because that's definitely the same thing that I do. Sometimes I do, but like everything else in life, not everything is always black and white. So sometimes there's, I always say like, you have goals and then you have sub goals, right? You have your overall goal. So if your overall goal is to grow from 2 to 20 million in 2 years, or 10 to 100 million in 3 years, or whatever it is, that's your overriding goal, right? And then you have sub goals within that. So the sub goals within that can be something as we want to increase employee productivity, or we want to, improve our infrastructure, or we want to improve these, well, there can be other offshoots as well. But I think that the the balance and the nuance and the kind of the dance really is just kind of figuring out, okay, we do have these other priorities as well, but we still have to not lose sight of the overriding priority. That's like you're saying, we're using logic here, right? That's the difference between having an idea and not having focus and just kind of running all over the place. You have to have some kind of structure. And then within that structure, as long as you can say, okay, now we have this sub goal that's addressing this area, but it is tied to our primary goal, and this is how it's going to be done, then I think that's a more of a better argument while not losing sight of the overall goal, right? Because I think that's the other thing that companies are understanding now with COVID, but even before, even though it wasn't said, is that it's important that you look at employee wellness and mental health and productivity, and that is extremely important. But you also want to make sure that you still balance with making sure that things get done in an organization, and that's something that's important as well.